Robert Black stole the life of our daughter Jennifer, but Robert Black didn't steal the lives of me and my family.
In prison, baby killers are often viewed with extreme disdain by both inmates and guards, facing brutal treatment, isolation, and heightened danger. Their crimes provoke intense hatred, leading to a life of constant fear and violence. Here's what happens to baby killers in prison.
The charges against Anthony Palma in the case of Kristen Hatfield, first-degree murder.
Anthony Palma, a resident of Oklahoma City, was infamously known for his involvement in a long cold case regarding the disappearance of Kristen Hatfield. Now, the case dates back to May 13, 1997, when Kristen was reported missing from her Midwest City home. Kristen's mother discovered a window screen had been tampered with, and there were traces of blood on Kristen's windowsill and some underwear found in the backyard. But no substantial leads emerged, and the case went cold for nearly 2 decades. Palma, on the other hand, who lived just 2 doors down from the Hatfield residence, had been interviewed early in the investigation, but wasn't considered a prime suspect at that time. He lived a pretty normal life, blending into the neighborhood and avoiding serious suspicion. The eventual breakthrough in the case came in 2015. Thanks to advancements in DNA technology, evidence collected from 1997 was retested, revealing that the DNA matched that of Anthony Palma. The pivotal discovery led to Palma's arrest on October 12, 2015. The entire community was in shock, as Palma had been living in that same house all these years, maintaining a very low profile. Now, during his trial, the prosecution presented the DNA evidence, linking Palma to the crime, which was crucial in securing a conviction. Palma was eventually found guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping, despite Kristen's body never being found. On October 13, 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And after all this time, Palma still maintained his innocence throughout the trial, but the overwhelming DNA evidence left little doubt about his involvement in the murder. The case remains one of the most significant examples of how advancements in forensic science can bring justice to cold cases, providing some closure to grieving families. While serving his life sentence, Palma was later found dead in his prison cell at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary on January 11, 2019. His death was ruled a homicide, believed that his cellmate strangled him and hit him in the head, killing him instantly. Palma's demise added another dark chapter to the story. But for Kristen Hatfield's family, his conviction and eventual death offered some semblance of justice for their long-lost daughter. Liam Dean, a 22-year-old from Leeds, UK, was sentenced to life imprisonment in October 2017 for the murder of his own daughter, Luna. The tragic event takes place in July 2017 when Dean, who was practically frustrated by Luna's crying, brutally attacked her. He later admitted to punching and shaking her, causing severe head injuries that ultimately led to her death. This case destroyed the nation due to the horrific nature of the crime and the young age of the victim. Luna Dean was born on July 9, 2017, to Liam Dean and his partner, Karen Bissett. Just 2 days after her birth, on July 11, 2017, Luna was left in Dean's care while Karen rested. Now, during this time, Luna began crying, as babies at that age usually do, which made Dean lose his temper and violently assault his own daughter. The following day, Luna's condition worsened, and she was taken to the Leeds General Infirmary, where medical professionals immediately recognized the severity of her injuries. But despite their best efforts to revive her, Luna eventually succumbed to her injuries on July 14, 2017. Initially, Dean tried to cover up his actions by claiming Luna had fallen, but the extent of her injuries didn't align with his story. Under police interrogation, it was later that Dean eventually confessed to punching Luna in the face, squeezing her little body, and shaking her, actions that caused catastrophic injuries, including brain damage, broken ribs, and a broken nose. While in court, Dean's defense highlighted his remorse and cooperation with the investigation. However, the prosecution emphasized the brutality of this assault and the vulnerability of the victim. The judge, Mr. Justice Goss, described this case as truly horrific and sentenced Dean to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 years, acknowledging the severity of the crime and the need for justice. Dean's sentencing brought some closure to Luna's family, but the impact of the crime left lasting scars. The case highlighted the crucial need to protect vulnerable infants and to be alert to signs of potential harm at the home. It also sparked conversations about the support young parents need and how social services can help prevent such tragedies. In a tragic turn of events for Dean, he would meet a violent end in prison. In November 2017, just a month after his sentencing, he was found dead in his cell at HMP Leeds. This guy was stabbed, strangled, and ended up suffocating. His cellmate John Westland, who was initially a prime suspect, was later convicted of the murder of Liam Dean. July 1, 2000. Roy Whiting brutally murders Sarah Payne in West Sussex, England. However, it was the lack of formal supervision by the authorities on Whiting that led to Payne's eventual demise. Born January 26, 1959, in Horsham, West Sussex, England, Whiting would have a relatively uneventful early life, but alarming criminal activities would characterize in his later years. Whiting's criminal history starts in 1995, with his conviction for abducting and sexually assaulting a girl. He was given 4 years in prison, but was released after only 2.5 years. Although deemed a high-risk offender, Whiting wasn't under any formal supervision after his release. So on July 1, 2000, Whiting commits his most notorious crime and murders Sarah Payne from a field near her grandparents' home in West Sussex. Sarah's disappearance triggered a massive search and attracted widespread media attention. It would be after 16 days that her body was discovered about 15 miles from where she was last seen. The investigation into Sarah's murder swiftly zeroed in on Whiting because of his prior conviction and suspicious actions. He was arrested on July 31, 2000, though he initially denied involvement. Crucial evidence tying him to the crime included fibers from Sarah's clothing found in his van and a strand of Sarah's hair on his sweatshirt. By December 2001, Roy Whiting was convicted of abduction and murdered and received a life sentence. The trial initially recommended a minimum of 50 years, but this guy was reduced to 40 years in 2010, making him eligible for parole in 2041. But you know what? His prison life was nothing short of a nightmare. On August 4, 2002, at HMP Wakefield, he was attacked with a razor by another inmate while fetching hot water. In June 2004, convicted murderer Ricky Tregaskis was found guilty of the assault, leaving Whiting with a 6-inch scar on his right cheek. Tregaskis, already serving a life sentence for killing a disabled man in Cornwall, received an additional 6 years he didn't care about. In July 2011, Roy Whiting was attacked again in prison and was stabbed in the eye. Whiting chose not to press charges, so no police investigation occurred since his injuries weren't life-threatening. And again on November 8, 2018, he was attacked when 2 inmates stabbed him in his cell at HMP Wakefield. He was hospitalized and returned to prison soon after in a stable condition. And now on February 11, 2024, he was attacked once more at HMP Wakefield. However, again, the injuries he sustained weren't considered life-threatening or likely to result in long-term damage. He's still currently incarcerated at HMP Wakefield and is waiting for his parole in 2041 if he makes it.
Star Hobson was murdered by someone who claimed to cherish her, a killer brought into her home. Savannah Brockhill has been sentenced to life in prison and will serve a minimum of 25 years.
September 2020 was when Savannah Brockhill, a 28-year-old from Keighley, West Yorkshire, would gain notoriety for her involvement in the tragic death of her lovers, Star Hobson. Born in 1993, Brockhill had a background in security work and boxing. Along the line, she met Star's mother, Frankie Smith, and entered in what was seen as this tumultuous and abusive relationship. Brockhill's history of violence and aggression surfaced in her relationship with Smith and subsequently extended to Star, who endured months of physical abuse before her eventual demise. Brockhill was known for controlling behavior, manipulating, and isolating Smith from her family and friends. Despite many concerns raised by relatives and friends to social services about Starr's welfare, these warnings were not adequately addressed. On September 22, 2020, Starr was found unresponsive and later pronounced dead at the hospital. The post-mortem examination revealed that she had suffered catastrophic injuries, including a fractured skull, broken ribs, and a lacerated vein, which were consistent with severe physical abuse. The investigation quickly focused on Brockhill and Smith as the prime suspects, leading to their eventual arrest. Now, during the trial, Brockhill's violent tendencies were highlighted, with evidence showing her as the primary aggressor. She was eventually found guilty of murdering Starr Hobson and was given life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years in December 2021. Frankie Smith, Starr's mother, was also convicted of causing or allowing the death of a child and received an 8-year sentence, which was later reduced as a result of the emotional torture she had to bear as a mother. One might expect Savannah to show regret for her actions while in prison, but according to the documentary HMP Style, Women Behind Bars, on My 5 in the UK, she appears to walk around prison with a broad smile on her face. Despite this unruly behavior, she's kept isolated from other inmates and is escorted by 4 or 5 prison officers for her own protection, as she's widely disliked in here, being the baby killer that she is. 1991 was when Beverly Allett earned the moniker Angel of Death, as she was being convicted of murdering 4 babies and attempted to murder 9 others while working as a nurse. Her crimes taking place at the Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in Lincolnshire would shock the nation, leading to significant changes in hospital practices and child protection policies. Born October 4th in 1968 in Corby Glen, Lincolnshire, England, Allett was a troubled kid, displaying attention-seeking behavior and often faking illnesses. After leaving school, Allett would train as a nurse despite her poor academic record and issues with attendance. Her fascination with hospitals and illness became a disturbing obsession, culminating in a spree of violence during her tenure at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital. Between February and April 1991, Allett would go after babies in her care, administering this lethal dose of insulin and potassium, causing cardiac arrest and other severe health issues. Her victims included Liam Taylor, who died after Allett injected him with a fatal dose of insulin, and also Timothy Hardwick, who suffered a fatal heart attack. Allett's methods were both cruel and calculated, exploiting her position of trust and the vulnerability of her victims. Suspicion began to mount when all these babies were dying, and a major investigation would show medical records being tampered with and the presence of toxic substances in the children's bodies. Allett's colleagues and hospital administrators were initially reluctant to believe that a nurse could be responsible, but the mounting evidence led to her eventual arrest in 1991. So now, during her trial in 93, Allett was diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a mental disorder in which a caregiver causes illness or injury to those in their care to gain attention or sympathy. And despite this diagnosis, she was found guilty on all charges and given 13 concurrent life sentences with a minimum term of 30 years. The judge described her as a serious danger to society, and she was incarcerated at Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility where she received treatments for her mental disorders. Now, during her time here, she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which some attribute to her self-injection of insulin during her crimes. Additionally, she was experiencing significant weight gain and had suffered multiple strokes. Notably, she became eligible for parole in November 2021 after serving only 20 years of her sentence. However, it's highly improbable that she'll ever be released from incarceration. Allett's actions have left a lasting impact on the families of her victims and even the medical community, serving as a chilling reminder of the potential for harm within such trusted institutions. Kristen Berry and Joseph Walsh became infamous due to the tragic death of their son, Chance Walsh, in 2015. Now, their story is that of child neglect and abuse taken to a whole new level. Kristen Berry, originally from Florida, had a troubled life with drug addiction and unstable relationships. She eventually met Joseph Walsh, who had somewhat of a similar background, and the two would quickly form a bond. In early 2015, Kristen gave birth to Chance, their son in Florida. This was after she lost her son Dwayne, who was just 2 weeks old back in 2014. Now, the couple's life was far from stable, as both Kristen and Joseph reportedly struggled with that drug addiction, which would heavily impact their ability to care for their newborn. Friends and family, especially Kristen's mother, noted that the couple became increasingly erratic and unreliable, often disappearing for days without explanation. By September 2015, the situation had reached a tragic climax. Little Chance was last seen alive in mid-September as he disappeared from the public eye. When questioned about their son's whereabouts, Kristen and Joseph gave various conflicting stories, claiming at one point that Chance had even died in a car accident. Well, their lies would unravel, and it was soon discovered that this couple had never reported their son missing, nor had they sought medical help or burial services. And by October 2015, after weeks of investigating and searching, law enforcement discovers the remains of Chance Walsh in a shallow grave in a remote area of Northport, Florida. The investigation showed that Chance had been dead for several weeks, and the circumstances surrounding that death were horrifying. It was determined that he'd been neglected and ultimately killed by his parents, who had placed his body in a plastic bag and buried him in this crude grave. And because of this, Kristen Berry and Joseph Walsh were eventually arrested and charged with first-degree murder, child neglect, and other related charges. And during their trials, the gruesome details of Chance's short life and tragic death were revealed, painting a bleak picture of neglect, abuse, and addiction. Now, according to Kristen, it was Joseph who killed the little kid on the morning of September 16, 2015. She said he struck the boy repeatedly, and when she pleaded for him to stop, warning that he might break the baby's neck, Joseph instead would slam Chance's head into the ground, and Chance would succumb to his injuries. The prosecution argued that the couple's drug use and unstable lifestyle directly led to Chance's death, and both were held responsible for the murder of their son. In January 2016, Kristen entered a no-contest plea to aggravated manslaughter, resulting in a 25-year prison sentence. As part of this agreement, she was required to testify against her child's father in a separate trial for second-degree murder. But get this, Kristen never had the chance to testify because on September 10, 2016, she was found unresponsive in her jail cell in Florida, and despite attempts at CPR and being transported to a hospital, she was pronounced dead from suicide. Well, I guess a little grief, guilt, and maybe withdrawal could lead to something like that. And prosecutors were concerned that her death might complicate the case against Joseph Walsh, who was ultimately sentenced to 45 years in prison for murdering his son, along with an additional 30 years for aggravated child abuse. This guy is living the harsh realities of prison life every single day. March 2013. Mervyn Bell commits this crime that was described as one of the most evil things that had ever been encountered. However, that same sick mind that led him to this heinous act would also lead him to his very own demise. Bell, born in the Kimberley region of Western Australia, had a real bad history with violent behavior, substance abuse, and run-ins with the law. His relationship with the mother of Charlie Mullally, Tamika Mullally, was stained with volatility and abuse. On the night of March 19, 2013, after a heated argument, Bell viciously assaults Tamika, ripping her clothes apart and leaving her severely injured. And despite clear signs of violence when the police arrived on scene, instead of immediately ensuring Charlie's safety, they arrested Tamika for disorderly conduct, a decision later criticized as a catastrophic failure in judgment. And taking advantage of that situation, Bell abducts Charlie, driving him across remote areas of Kimberley. And over the course of 15 agonizing hours, Bell subjected Charlie to horrific abuse and torture. The brutality left Charlie with fatal injuries, like a broken leg, extensive internal injuries, and burns. Bell callously abandoned Charlie on the side of a highway, where he was later found and rushed to the hospital, but he succumbed to his injuries shortly after. The case quickly garnered national attention, with people trying to understand the glaring systemic failures allowing this to happen. Questions were raised about the police's response to the initial domestic violence incident, how they handled Tamika Mullally, and the broader issues surrounding the protection of Indigenous women and children in Australia. Well, in 2014, Mervyn Bell was eventually tried and found guilty of Charlie Mullally's murder. The court heard harrowing details of the events leading up to the child's death, with the judge describing Bell's actions as pure evil. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 27 years. This sentence reflects the crime's horrific nature and Bell's lack of remorse. At last, in what seemed to be some type of justice, Mervyn Bell was found dead in his shower about midday on September 8, 2015. His death was ruled a suicide as he was found hanging in that cell at the Casuarina prison in Western Australia.
Why did they let him out? Why didn't they vet him a bit more?
When he was arrested, Hatch said if he was sent to prison, he would be a dead man.
Colin Hatch was a different kind of killer. A pedophile whose crimes shocked the nation and exposed significant flaws in the criminal justice system's handling of dangerous offenders. Born in 1971, Hatch had a troubled upbringing, surprise, surprise, marked by early signs of deviant behavior. By the time he was a teenager, he'd already started his sexual predatory activities, targeting young boys. His first run-in with the law would come in the 1980s when he was convicted of sexually assaulting a boy. But despite his evident danger to children, Hatch was given a lenient sentence and was released after a short time. Upon that release, he would continue to prey on young boys, escalating his violence and becoming increasingly shameless in his actions. In January 1993, this sick, demented human would lure Sean Williams to his apartment in London. Sean, trusting and innocent, had no idea of the danger he was in. And once he was inside that apartment, Colin sexually assaulted and brutally murdered Sean, strangling him to death. This crime was particularly gruesome, and the details that emerged during that investigation and the trial horrified the public. Hatch was quickly arrested after Sean's body was discovered, and during his trial, it became clear that Hatch had no remorse for his actions and remained a significant threat to children. The court would hear about how Hatch had this long history of predatory behavior and how the system sucks at stopping people from reoffending. Now the judge, recognizing the severity of this crime and Hatch's ongoing danger to society, sentenced him to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he should never be released. But even though he was in jail, the public was still angry and concerned. His case became a symbol of the failures within the criminal justice system, especially how they manage and monitor sex offenders. There was a widespread call for stricter measures to protect children from individuals like Hatch, and in his case contributed to subsequent changes in the laws governing the sentencing and supervision of sex offenders in the UK. By February 2011, Colin Hatch's life ended violently. He was killed by another inmate, Damien Folks, at Full Sutton Prison. Folks, serving a life sentence for armed robbery, attacked Hatch in his cell, stabbing him to death. Looks like justice really is served in prison. Now, some might question the safety and security within the prison system, but Hatch definitely poses no threat to children anymore. Andrew Lloyd, a man infamously known for the brutal murder of his partner's son, Aaron Gilbert, in 2005. A crime that brought about the creation of a whole new set of laws and led to his eventual demise. Andrew Lloyd, from Swansea, Wales, had a troubling past with some violent behavior. By the time he met Rebecca Lewis, Aaron's mother, he'd already developed a reputation for being aggressive and unstable. But despite these red flags, Rebecca still entered into a relationship with Lloyd, who soon moved in with her and Aaron. There's no shock here that the early months of this relationship would have controlling and abusive behavior surrounding it. This guy would often lash out violently, not only at Rebecca, but also at Aaron. Friends and neighbors would even report hearing frequent arguments and signs of physical abuse within the household, but all these warnings went unheeded. In May 2005, Lloyd's violence escalated to a fatal level. While Rebecca was out of the house, Lloyd was left alone to care for Aaron. In a fit of rage, Lloyd inflicts severe injuries on Aaron, including multiple blows to the head and body. and when Rebecca returned home, she finds her son, Aaron, unconscious and unresponsive. And despite desperate attempts to revive him by giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, Aaron was still rushed to the hospital and was pronounced dead from his injuries after 18 hours of trying to save his life. The post-mortem examination revealed the extent of the abuse Aaron had suffered. He sustained a fractured skull, multiple bruises, and internal injuries, consistent with severe physical assault. The investigation quickly focused on Lloyd, who was immediately arrested and charged with Aaron's murder. During the trial, it became evident that Aaron had been subjected to ongoing abuse in the weeks leading up to his death. Lloyd was described as a violent, dangerous individual who had taken out his frustrations on a defenseless child. The court heard harrowing details of the abuse and that final attack that led to Aaron's death. In 2006, Andrew Lloyd was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years before being eligible for parole. The judge condemned Lloyd's actions, highlighting the vulnerable nature of his victim and the brutal manner in which that crime was committed. Now, it came as no surprise that Lloyd was being charged for this brutal murder, but it was a little shocking when Aaron's mother, Rebecca, was being charged as well. She was charged with familial homicide, becoming the first woman to be charged with such an offense, and was also found guilty. Rebecca was eventually given a 7-year sentence and was released in 2010, given a new identity, while Andrew received a worse fate, because on November 19, 2020, at the age of 37, he died alone in his cell after contracting COVID-19.
This is Robert Black, now the worst child serial killer the UK has ever known.
August 12, 1981, Robert Black snatches the bicycle of Jennifer Carty, after which he abducted, assaulted, and strangled her, leaving her for dead. She would be the first of many young girls in the UK that he would gruesomely murder during the 1980s. Born April 21, 1947 in Grangemouth, Scotland, we can already sense his early life was marked with instability. Well, he was abandoned by his mother shortly after birth and placed into foster care. His childhood was marred by abuse, including a period in his life when he became a victim of sexual abuse. It would be all these traumas that shape his deviant behavior in adulthood. Black's criminal activities began with minor offenses, but his deviant tendencies would escalate over time. In 1963, at the age of 16, he was convicted of lewd behavior after luring a girl into a deserted building and attempting to strangle her. Despite this early sign of his dangerous proclivities, Black was released after a brief detention, and this would do nothing to stop him from committing serious offenses. During the 1970s and 80s, Robert Black worked as a delivery driver, a job that provided him the perfect cover for his heinous crimes. He traveled extensively across the UK, delivering posters to various locations, and this mobility allowed him to hunt young victims without drawing any suspicion. Black's victims were girls whom he'd abduct, sexually assault, and then murder. He would then dump their bodies in remote locations, making it hard for authorities to connect the dots. Between 1981 and 1986, Black was known to have gruesomely murdered at least 4 girls: Jennifer Carty, Susan Maxwell, Carolyn Hogg, and Sarah Harper. His crime spread fear across the UK and a massive manhunt was launched. Black remained at large for years, evading justice. But his reign of terror would come to an end on July 14, 1990, when he was arrested near Stowe, Scotland. As he was trying to abduct a young girl and throw her into his van, he was spotted by a postman. The police were informed and they searched his van, discovering evidence linking him to the murders of those 4 girls, including the items of clothing that belonged to him. August 10, 1990, his trial began. It lasted for only a day, as he was eventually convicted of these gruesome murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. And during his time in prison, he would remain unrepentant and never admit to any of his crimes. But his tragic end came on January 12, 2016, when he too was found dead in his cell at Magaberry Prison in Northern Ireland. Now, he died of natural causes, believed to be from a heart attack at the age of 68. Sadly, though, following his death, we'll never know about other potential victims, because it was suspected he killed way more than 4,